to arrive at a cathedral in Spain. Many people undertake this per year, doing part or all of it. And one of our church members, Mel Soriano, did this just in September. And so he's going to share his story with you. Please welcome Mel.
Thank you. This is a daily ritual. Dressing and undressing and wearing these items as necessary. Thank you guys for showing up. I appreciate this very much, and I'm glad to know that the idea of pilgrimage and going around and visiting places that have historically been of interest for religious and spiritual places might be of interest to you. This is the Way of St. James, this specific discussion, and the walk I specifically took was the Camino de Frances. It is the most popular route, and this route takes you from the border of Spain by France all the way to Santiago de Compostela. Now, this is just the most popular one, and it was popularized because royalty could take this route fairly easily from continental Europe. But there were other routes. There's a route through Portugal, there's a route through southern Spain, other ways of getting there. And the destination, Santiago de Compostela, the destination is supposedly holding the relics of St. James the Apostle. So when you get there, you actually see the small shrine underneath the cathedral, and you could actually pray in the chapel down there to John's, I think, older brother, St. James, and have some private time. There are also other famous places along the way. I actually started halfway through in Burgos. I couldn't quite take all the time off to be gone for this entire trip. And if you wanted to see what some of the things are about the whole trip, there's actually a famous movie that was released in 2010 starring Martin Sheen. You could see this on Netflix and Amazon. And frankly, I knew about the Camino since my backpacking and bicycling days in Europe back in the mid-'80s. But most Americans, I think, have only become familiar with the Camino since this movie came out. It's a very moving depiction of a journey through Spain, and I believe EFM has used it as a discussion for some of their topics. Why do we do these sort of things? Why do we take a pilgrimage? Believe me, on the very, very first day, I thought to myself, why am I doing this? And I just needed to be reminded. And I was actually blogging about this, and I wrote down some links up here, and the links are also on a slide later on. But I was blogging before the trip why I wanted to do this. And the most superficial reason was in having drinks with a friend and trying to brainstorm what to do on my 50th birthday. I'm just not a person to throw a party, or, I mean, I have parties all the time, dinner parties, get-togethers. It just didn't seem like me to take a cruise or something. And then the Camino came up, and I thought, now that sounds like me, that sounds like something I would enjoy. And it's something that I've wanted to do, actually, for such a long time. So for me, it's a time to mark a milestone. It's a time to seek and explore and discover new things. And I wanted something that might be a challenge, something that's, for some people, it's even a sense of adventure. These two young teenage boys I met, one of them turned 18 while on this journey, and his cousin, who turned 19 just before they began their journey, left their homes, their front door and their homes in Austria, and walked 3,000 kilometers on this journey. And if you were following me on the blog or on Facebook, you'd have seen how shocked I was to think anyone would walk that much. Their brand new shoes were falling apart, and so on. But it was for them a sense of adventure. At least that's what they said. It's also a chance for burial and starting life anew, which I think is one of those hidden things that most people don't want to admit to themselves, because talking about burying something or releasing things is a painful sort of thing to discuss. And those times when I was closest to talking about or thinking about burial and renewal were the times I tended to weep on this journey. Whether it's because of exhaustion or because you're truly being touched, there were many opportunities for you to feel emotional and to weep. And then, of course, if you watch the movie, there's lots of reasons that are definitely more superficial. A chance to lose some weight or quit smoking, which I thought was sort of funny, except one fellow I met, a really nice guy from the Black Forest in Germany, he gave me his cigarette lighter and said, "That was my last cigarette, thank you very much, and hope you enjoy the rest of your trip." And once we got to Santiago. So there are other reasons why people go that might not be as spiritual as you would think. This is my schedule, just to give you an idea. I only did half of the trip. So I left LAX on September 10th. I got into Madrid and Burgos on September 11th and walked around there, explored there, sort of tried to get the jet lag out of the way, and then took a short little bus ride to a town called Terradillos de los Templarios. Templarios, the Knights Templar, that's a rather famous Middle Ages sort of group. The Templarios, actually one of their primary reasons for existence was to protect the pilgrims who were walking on this 1,000-year-old journey. And so they were trying to find ways of making sure people could take a very safe spiritual journey. And in 2 weeks' time, I arrived in Santiago de Compostela, and that's not normal. That should have been about 3.5 weeks. I walked rather quickly compared to what is normal. I walk about 20 to 25 miles a day, 30 to 40 kilometers. And so most people walk 10 to 15 miles a day. And it's up to you. It's your journey. The sort of statistics I will be showing are mine and mine alone. And they shouldn't be something that drives your schedule. It's also one of the reasons why it's hard to predict who you're going to meet on any given day, because everybody has a different schedule. I did add extra time. The reason I wanted to go quickly was because I had to leave after the vestry meeting, and I wanted to arrive so that I could attend the Mass at the cathedral on my dad's 80th birthday, and be able to call him up and say, attended the Mass, lit a candle for you today on your birthday, and my journey is your journey together. And so I was able to do that. I padded extra time in case I wasn't able to, and because of that, I was able to visit a couple of other historical places. Salamanca, which has the 4th oldest university in the world. Avila, St. Teresa of Avila, also the center of the Spanish Inquisition. And Segovia, another place of great spirituality, and also another place where the Inquisition was strong. So these to me were important parts of my journey, because I wanted to grasp not just the spiritual sides, but the mechanical sides, if you will, of religion and faith, and see how that worked together. If you read my blog, letallwhoarethirsty.com, you'll see how I grappled with some of these issues. So technically I walked on the Camino itself in those 2 weeks about 400 kilometers. I will have time at the end of this talk, by the way, to answer any of your questions. 30 to 40 kilometers per day. We talk in metric system in Spain, so you start to adjust that way. And I tend to walk fast. I walked 5 to 5.5 kilometers per hour, and that wasn't the fastest. There were, this elderly Japanese man kept zooming past me and then stopping for coffee, and then zooming past me and then stopping for coffee. And then there was Josep Maria from Barcelona, and he went about 6 kilometers per hour, and he would stop for his smoke. It was fascinating. The thing that was amazing about that, which I didn't realize at first, was that if you have a certain distance that you walk every single day, you will end up seeing people who also walk the same distances every single day. You're likely to stay within a village or two of them, or likely in the same village, and perhaps in the same accommodations. So at first it didn't seem likely, but I did see quite a number of people on a regular basis. So in addition to the 400, I did about 70 kilometers. Yeah, you'd think I'd be done at the end of the day. You still walk around, you still want to do a little sightseeing, you want to go into the cathedrals and the churches and see the villages. So I walked another 70 kilometers during those 2 weeks, and then I walked about 50 kilometers after the end of the Camino. So I did a total of 520 during my 3 weeks away of 125 hours worth of walking according to my app. And what shocked me was the app said I had ascended and descended 12 miles. The guidebook that most English speakers use is John Brierley's Camino de Santiago. And we love, and totally depended on this book. We also want to punch him in the face. Because so many things were just not quite right. Like on the second day when I thought I was only going 34 kilometers and ended up walking 41 kilometers, thinking I just didn't need this extra hour and a half worth of walking in the rain. So his measurements sometimes were askew. So it was close enough. It was close enough. But there, oftentimes he would say, it's a simple, gentle hike today, except for this part, and what you don't realize is a simple, gentle hike means going over and up and down these hills that are gentle, but there are a lot of them, and they're non-stop. And so after a while, you sort of sit there and think, there is no concept of gentle on your feet when you're walking this far. So now, I'm going through some of the technical stuff before I go through the discussion of the spiritual stuff. Where did I stay? This is like the question everyone asks me. The most common place for everyone to stay are in the albergues, which is sort of like a youth hostel or dormitory. So bunk beds, one right after the other. The smallest room I had was, it had 4 people, 2 sets of bunk beds. And the most, I think, was 80. Yeah, that's kind of interesting when the snoring goes. But they're very inexpensive. So if you stay in the municipal albergues, that's only 5 to 10 euros at $8 to $14 or so. And if you stay in the private ones, the privately run albergues, that's about 10 euros. And there are a number that are donativo, which are donation only. And those are usually the church-run ones. But that, not necessarily. My very first one was at a monastery, but they charged 10 euros. It was a very nice one. And that was one that only had 4 people in that room. You could also stay in hostels. And at the Episcopal Center, Joanna Sartorius also did the walk in August. And she agreed with me on this one. About every 4 or 5 days, you sort of need your own private space and your own private bathroom. And so you stay in something akin to a motel, and that's called a hostal, excuse me. And if you want, you can stay in very nice hotels that are similar to what we stay here in America, and those start at 50 euros on up. And I stayed once in a bed and breakfast, charming bed and breakfast. Shared bath, just like a typical bed and breakfast, shared bath and private bedrooms, and breakfast, and it was a delight. Most people will start their day with a little coffee after 2 hours or so, or 1 or 2 hours of walking at some cafe, and they'll typically have a light lunch. I tended to just eat fruit and continue walking, because I just couldn't imagine eating anything heavy and continuing walking. Otherwise, I'd need a nap. And I would pull over, not for coffee, because if you think about it, there aren't very many public bathrooms in the middle of the field and things like that. So I would drink hot chocolate instead, just to warm me up a little bit. The pilgrim's menu was the most common dinner for folks, and especially when you're in the rural villages and there weren't restaurants, you would eat in the albergues. And the pilgrim's menu usually ran around €9, and you got 3 courses with bread and wine and water. You got spoiled on them. By the time my trip ended, I was in Madrid looking for pilgrim's menus, but wow, these are expensive meals here. it's such a better deal on a pilgrim's menu. I mean, to start with the first course of paella, I sort of thought, okay, I'm done for the day. And frankly, I did lose weight because I was so tired at the end of the day, I could barely finish the pilgrim's menu, and even though I might have been a little bit hungry, I just wanted to sleep, and was giving away my bread because of the gluten, and just wanted some rest. You could also order a la carte, or otherwise known as raciones, and oftentimes I would just buy some food and just picnic outside because it was just so beautiful. There were so many beautiful places, and it was so enjoyable to just sit out there and enjoy. Now this is a map of all of Europe, and I think I mentioned that traditionally the Camino was something that you did from your front doorstep. It wasn't something where you flew in 1,000 years ago to a specific starting point. You started from your front doorstep. So these teenagers, they did something that St. Francis, 800 years ago this year, St. Francis did from Italy. So it was a special year of celebration for the Franciscans who walked the Camino this year. So you can start from all sorts of places. I had met someone who, let's see, the boys left from Austria, and then met someone from France, met someone who left from Liechtenstein. And Liechtenstein has only 30,000 people, and I thought, what are the odds of running into one of them anywhere, much less the Camino? That's smaller than Altadena. And so my way when I left was to go alone and to observe others. It was a chance to do some discernment. I'm going to switch to a slideshow here so that I could talk a little more without the PowerPoint. And if you will, it's sort of like a super duper long labyrinth journey, which I care about very much. The labyrinth ministry here is an opportunity to use a tool as a metaphor of a journey. And so I would walk around with all these thoughts and preconceptions of what my journey was. And I thought my journey was going to be one where I could be alone, and I planned out my Camino. And I thought about what the Camino was going to do with me, for me. I sat down with Janine for, oh, God bless her, 2 hours she put up with me going, what am I going to do for all these weeks without someone to talk to, because I tend to talk. And I had already promised myself I wouldn't be on Facebook so that I could actually experience something new without reading what's going on at home. I didn't think about what the Camino would do to me, and that was my major lesson for this trip. The Camino is not something you do. The Camino does you. You have to let the Camino work its magic on you. And if you are trying to control the Camino and make the Camino do what you thought, you might not learn some of the valuable lessons that are on offer to you. And it was in yielding to that and allowing the Camino to work its magic and allowing the concept of pilgrimage to work its magic, that's when I really started, I felt, to blossom and open up inside and really feel as though I'm getting it. I'm learning some new things. One of the things that shocked me when I was reading about, here's a perfect example, you're on the trail. I blogged about the fact that what am I going to do alone prior to the trip? It was a big concern. You're never alone. And I sort of knew that you're never alone, but I thought you're never alone because God was with you. It's more than that. You're never alone because in September, 30,000 pilgrims are on the Camino de Santiago during those 800 kilometers. Now that means per mile, there's hardly anybody around you. But that means you really can't say no one will ever be alone. You will always be meeting other people. And that's the other lesson I learned that was very important. I went into this thinking I was on a spiritual journey for myself, and what came out of it was the deepest, most intimate, most profound moments were when I was talking to someone walking beside me, whether it was 15 minutes, whether it was at a cafe, or whether with these three Austrian young guys who I traveled with, three Austrians who I traveled with. The last week together, we traveled together for the most part. It was amazing to me how wrong I was, that spirituality was something I was going to discover on my own. I found that I was most connected with what God wanted from me on this trip when I was communicating with others, in relationship with others, and touching others with my story and having them touch me and shape me with their stories. That to me was, I felt foolish afterwards when I came across this, and I thought to myself, how could I have been so naive or selfish about what the Camino was? The Camino isn't supposed to be about internal things isolated and by itself. I think Gary Hall, who used to be a priest here, would be appalled that I thought that, and I agree. I thought that, and I'm so glad I came out of it to realize it's in communion with other people and working the magic of communion like at church that you really got to learn some things about yourself. Another thing I learned, an important lesson, was that anyone can be bigoted. Anyone can be biased. It was a very important lesson for me. I sat in one village in my dorm room and met a fellow who was in his 70s, tall, thin, white, older, southern accent from Alabama. And I just thought, oh, we're not going to get along. He's in the next bed, I'm just not going to have anything in common with him. And yet I kept running into him throughout the day, at the grocery store, at the church, and different places. And I had dinner with my friends, and then came back to my room, and he and I started to talk. And I realized I was sort of embarrassed about myself. I was being bigoted. For those who were at the leadership training yesterday, I was exhibiting all sorts of modern isms because I had sort of pigeonholed him as someone I wouldn't be able to connect with. I asked him why he was on the trip, and he said he was on a trip because he was an elder in his Presbyterian church, and he needed to reflect on ways to get his church to understand that they needed to be more inclusive. And that his grandson can marry anyone he wants, and he is proud to stand beside him and whoever his husband would be, if that be the case. And I tell you, that I cried that night. I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned. I was wrestling like Jacob. I just couldn't believe that I had made such a foolish and assumption about someone, and I didn't give that person any benefit of the doubt during the day. So it was another thing I learned on the Camino. It's everyone's there for such personal, deep reasons. Every reason matters. Every reason counts. And it's incumbent upon us to be open to that and to allow them to work their healing magic on you by having them share their story. Other things I learned, anyone can be your friend. Everyone can be your ally and help you out. Anyone can be your hero. Anyone could be someone on a pedestal that you just admire. Those are the two cousins. And Conrad in the back, photobombing. Emma and her 3-year-old son were walking the Camino from Slovakia. They started in Leon, so they were walking only about 250 miles. The 3-year-old would be in the stroller, and then would walk some, and then would be in the stroller, and then would walk some. And it was just, it was so moving to see them on the Camino. And when I saw her on my very last day in Santiago, I gave a big hug, and I talked to Conrad, who didn't speak English, so she would translate to him, and he would smile, and as I congratulated him on doing something pretty amazing, I hope he remembers this. And so everyone can be, everyone can admire you for what you're doing and for the reasons you're going. And there's a Conrad. And everyone can be your confidant. Everyone can share their deepest, most intimate stories with you during those brief moments you're with them. And that's where you feel a bond with everybody. I learned to trust a lot more. I learned to trust in God and in myself. I realized I didn't have a lot of trust because I overpacked. This backpack was overflowing. I brought too much stuff. With water, my backpack weighed 27 pounds, which seemed, according to the guidelines, reasonable. I didn't like it. I didn't like it at all. And I was shedding, for the first 5 days, items at every albergue and hostel. Because I said, okay, I could buy this, I could buy a replacement for that if I need to, and I was just leaving things behind. And I just didn't need all that. If I had to do it all again, I would have only one hiking shirt and another hiking shirt, and just alternate between the two, because you can do your laundry every day. There's absolutely no reason to have anything in excess. You can't see the destroyed knees in that photo. I fell 5 times on my right knee. It was a bloody mess, and I thought, good heavens, our Lord only fell 3 times during the Passion, and I fell 5 times. And people who followed me on Facebook, on the blog, know about the blisters that this never seemed to end. I learned that I overpacked my backpack, and I overpacked my Camino, my agenda, because I was trying to control the Camino. And instead, I should have had just a basic idea of what I wanted to do and let the Camino work on me. And so rather than defining everything, I should have packed light in my soul and spirits. And in terms of trusting, I did learn that I should just leave things behind. Whether I left things at home physically or left things on the Cruz de Ferro, which is a giant cross, and you bring a stone. I brought a stone from Eton, from Echo Mountain. And I brought a stone, and it represented, for me, all the weights that have held me down on my journey. And I left it at that cross, and I sobbed. I actually sobbed. I sort of lost control over myself at that point because I couldn't believe how much of a relief that was. And it reminded me when in Taizé, during the Taizé services, you kneel at the cross and you put your head or you touch the cross and ask that the cross carry your burdens. That's what it felt like to me, and in a more intense way because I had walked 25 miles to get there. It was very emotional. At the end of the Camino, I also learned to journey. You are definitely focused on the physicality. You're wondering, why does this body part ache? Because I didn't know I had a body part there, and why is it hurting? You are pondering so much of the human aspects. And then you start releasing those concerns because you become used to it. And what you discover is that as you put each step forward, you now have a hymn in your mind that follows the cadence of your walk. Or you have a prayer in your mind, and you didn't realize it, that follows what you saw. There was one day, literally for 2 hours, one rainbow after another. Enormous, vibrant, crazy rainbows. And the only thing I thought of during that walk was, one, don't slip, it's wet. And I did slip. But two, was God's promise to us in that rainbow. And that was so powerful to me during each and every one of those steps down that mountain to see those rainbows.
Mel, you talked about it being a super duper long labyrinth journey, and I would love to hear more about that. Was there any of the trifold path for you, the release, receive, return? Was there an arc of this journey that felt that way, that you feel in labyrinth?
Most certainly. It's really interesting because in the labyrinth ministry we talk about how there's a certain rise and fall, if you will, of walking the labyrinth, where you're releasing and then you're acquiring and then you're integrating, if you will. The three phases. And that's exactly what happened with me on this journey. The first phase, where I was focusing on my body, that was releasing my bodily issues, releasing all the things that weighed me down and were fogging my mind. And then the realization that you're learning some new things and you just have to accept it. And if you follow my blog, if you take a look and see the history on there, you'll realize I'm asking more questions during that phase than anything. I'm sitting there at the end of those blog postings going, I've got to think about this. And it was just fascinating to see that. And then towards the end, I'm integrating, going, these three boys from Austria, one who was on his bicycle, he was bicycling across Spain. The other two were cousins walking from Austria directly. The one on the bicycle, Conrad, he got off his bike and walked with me. He said, it's not the same. I really enjoy talking with you, and I think that I'm going to get more if I walk with you. And I said, well, you don't have to. I mean, I know you're a bicyclist and this is part of your adventure. And he said, no, this is right. And that's when the integration was going, and it was all making so much more sense about how we're all in this together, and we're going to make the trip better by being together. I called the hotel. I booked using my Marriott points, the Marriott at Santiago de Compostela, and said, I want a massage, and I want all these nice things when I get there, because I am going to be dead tired. I called them up and said, could you bring up, make it, instead of a king-size bed, a room with a double, and bring up a couple of extra cots. I'm going to invite these three boys to join me so that they don't have to stay in the albergue, and that we could celebrate together the end of an amazing journey, and which is what we did. But the gift for me in return for that was I got to watch the two who had walked 3,000 kilometers. That's Chicago to LA, that distance. I watched as they Skyped their mothers and heard the screaming, because they hadn't talked to their mothers in those 3 months, and heard the screaming and the joy, and I just thought that's just one of the most beautiful things I've ever witnessed. So that was their gift to me, I guess, without realizing it, for touching my heart. So it definitely followed with Labyrinth. Thanks, Becky.
Mel, you should share your passports.
Oh, yes. Thank you, Stephen. Oh, first of all, Stephen, stand up, because Stephen has an arrow on his shirt. Those are everywhere. And they're everywhere and they're nowhere. And you find them on a light post, you find them on the ground, you find them in the oddest locations, and you have to seek them out. Over here is the guidebook. Over here is my passport. You get it stamped everywhere, every place you stay, every place you eat, and you get at the end, if you have your proper stamps, you get Compostela over there, a little sort of diploma. It's not the objective. It's sort of a pat on the back. The objective was to do the Camino, but as with anything, it's nice to see a physical manifestation of what you had done. Yes.
How do you prepare before you go? What would you prepare?
How do you prepare?
Oh, how did I prepare? Yes, thank you. I hike all the time. So I hike all the time, and I go up into the mountains. And but what I wasn't accustomed to was hiking with a backpack. So I, in the month prior, started hiking with my backpack, and that was what was different for me. I also don't normally hike with a hiking stick. And I went and got a very collapsible, this collapses into a carry-on. This is actually a camera monopod, so I could do double duty. And I learned to walk with one of these. I also learned that if you walk 520 kilometers, you will erode about an inch off of the bottom of your, of your stick, which was kind of surprising. I thought, good grief, what did I do to my feet? And other things I learned to prepare was to make sure I remembered how to properly treat blisters and things like that. So I didn't have a chance to practice before, but I certainly practiced that during. And talking to people who had taken the journey previously helped substantially. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Here's the shell. Okay, so if you see anyone with this shell,
I'm doing good.
they're a pilgrim. So
Wonderful. It's not their full time. It's finally important, and I'm hoping that I talked to your people, and I talked to my previous real estate guys, so those are the only two people. We were going to go out there.
For hiking. I really want to do the hiking.
They have a program that's expensive, so we opted to go the cheap route.
Is it once a month or is it?
It's once a month. It's Saturday.
They were, she did. I wondered. I mean, she was huge. Yeah, she's very
I was thinking of leadership things, and then I realized, oh no, I only have 2 weekends to get everything out of the off, the old office.
Yeah. Because you guys haven't completely moved out of the spot.
No, I mean, we're looking at the new one.
You must be very proud of that guy.
I am. I think he's amazing. I can't imagine doing it.
No,
So yeah, it was pretty
I didn't
amazing.
have buses. No,
You know what? You actually can, if you kind of want to take a bus and skip part of the walk. You can actually do that.
we've actually discussed a possibility of something like this for transformational journeys.
And there's a service where if you don't want to carry your whole backpack for a day,
Oh, I guess they told me that.
they can take it to the next hostel for you.
Yeah.
So there's that for people
Like for
who,
old guys.
Or Mel did it once. Mel did it once. So, well, I guess he's old.
I give you a hug.
You?
You guys rock. I love it. Love it. Take care. You too.